You're listening to Quantum Conversations with Karen Curry Parker. Join us as we explore new frontiers in consciousness, science, and evolution. And now here's your host, Karen Curry Parker.
The brain and the body don't always know the difference between a real event and a memory. When we experience trauma and pain, we can store it in the body and sometimes re-experience it over and over again, paralyzing us and holding us back from fully embracing the joy and love that life can offer us. We are imprinted by these traumas, not because we're broken or dysfunctional, but because we are programmed for survival. These traumatic imprints serve to protect us, keep us aware and on our toes, preparing us to defend ourselves should we re-experience these traumas in our lives again. We think we need to heal our minds. Just change your thinking about events, or even try to not think about traumatic events or losses again. But the imprint on our body overrides our minds, and even the most intense attempt at mind mastery sometimes can't change the impact of the imprint of events on our body. These imprints can keep us in a constant state of low-grade stress and stimulate our adrenals, causing us to eventually burn out on life. This burnout can be physical, emotional, and even spiritual, leaving us living our lives in pain or forcing us to turn off the full light of our being in order just to survive on a day-to-day basis. Think about this for a moment. Ask yourself, are you living life full on? Do you leap out of bed each and every day, eager to get at life? Do you drag yourself home at the end of the day and hide out with Netflix and your favorite ice cream? Do you hide from your dreams? Is quiet despair part of your mindset? Kate O'Connell proposes that we can move beyond the imprinting of trauma in our bodies, and that sometimes the trauma we carry isn't even our own, but a result of things that happened to us generations before we were even born, carried in our epigenetic lineage. To heal, to truly heal, we have to heal on a cellular level, and an integrated energetic approach is crucial to making our healing permanent and for us to move beyond our imprint. Hi, I'm Karen Curry Parker, and I'm so excited to share with you today a quantum conversation with Kate O'Connell, and she's going to be talking to us today about her new book, Beyond the Imprint. And I don't usually read directly what somebody writes about their book. I like to read the book and synthesize it, but there is a paragraph here that describes this book so beautifully that I'm actually just going to read it before we dive into conversation. So this paragraph says, Beyond the Imprint heralds a new paradigm of thinking within the field of mental health counseling, far beyond the duality of our unconscious condition. Quantum physics is beginning to replace the mechanistic worldview of Newtonian physics and is teaching us with every new discovery that we are intimately interconnected with our environment and everything in it. This includes the understanding that we can change what is outside of us by simply changing ourselves. I feel like I should just launch from that paragraph because that's exactly where I want to go with just about every conversation we have here on Quantum Conversations. And Kate, I'm so excited to talk to you. Welcome for being here, and welcome Thank you for creating this powerful piece of work. I have so many questions. I'm ready to dive in. Are you ready?
Great, let's do it. Yeah, into the deep end, preferably.
Okay, let's go. So I'm going to break this paragraph apart because there's so much richness in here. So let's talk about, first of all, for just a minute, give me your traditional background in mental health counseling, because I'm assuming you probably started off as a quote unquote normal person before you dove off the deep end into this.
Unfortunately, no, I did not. I actually I spent 5 years up in the Adirondacks in upstate New York studying and training with a Cherokee medicine woman and shaman. And in doing so, became fairly adept at working and assessing with people on the energetic level. and recognized that I was only accessing a small percentage of the population. So at 43, I went back to school after 25 years and got a graduate degree in psychology, specializing in mental health counseling. And then I started post-grad doing intensive in-home services and working for 2 agencies prior to going into private practice. And so the work that I did for the first 5 years was really very eye-opening in understanding the systems that were in place to help people who were struggling at every level, and then to recognize what wasn't working. And then in my private practice, I just began to stitch together an increased awareness as to what does work. And then as a result of all of that, I created this modality called Beyond the Imprint.
Wow. So, okay. So I'm just going to continue breaking down this paragraph. You ready?
Sure.
You say,
Sure.
Far beyond the duality of our unconscious condition. What is the duality of our unconscious condition?
Yeah, that's it right there. You nailed it, because I've told people, you're very good at distilling everything down to its essence. I've told people that if there was one chapter and only one chapter that they read in this book, it would be the chapter on the dualistic paradigm, because without realizing it, everything that we believe and all of our perceptions and all of our relationship dynamics are being informed by our unconscious conditioning from the dualistic paradigm, the collective consensus, which has been in place for centuries, which is the understanding that aspects of ourselves are separate and apart from other aspects of ourselves, and that we experience separateness from anything outside of us. And so that's all playing out, and the belief systems that come out of the dualistic paradigm are essentially black and white, duality. So it's up and down, it's heaven and hell, it's good and bad, it's right and wrong. And we are in the early stages of a huge paradigm shift right now on the planet, which is why we're experiencing a significant amount of destabilization in all of the systems that have held this duality in place. And this is a huge focus when I work with clients, is to help them understand that most of what, if not all of what they're experiencing that they've identified as undesirable, is coming from beliefs that they have about themselves and others and reality in general, in which they are attempting to get their needs met in ways that they haven't been met at critical stages of development, by being reliant on something or someone outside of them to show up a certain way to ensure that that happens. And that is the fundamental framework of a codependent relationship. And it's what essentially sets us up for all of our angst and suffering, is the fact that we've identified without realizing it that something outside of us has to show up a certain way in order for us to be okay. And this work that I do and the modality that I've created takes us beyond that.
So I'm just, in my mind as you're going through this, I'm just adding all the pieces of the puzzle. And I'm actually looking at the cover of your book in my hand here. And you have, a genetic, DNA helix sort of at the bottom, sort of rolling up into a person. And
right.
I'm assuming that part of what you really are talking about when you talk about imprinting is not just those places where, from our own experience as children into adulthood, we were set up with this dualistic expectation of good, bad, mind, body, all that
right.
stuff. That you're also looking at the forces that influence our perceptions and the choices that we make as well, including epigenetics, correct?
Yes, correct. So it's the understanding, in psychology, there's been this ongoing debate, nature versus nurture, as to what has the most influence on human development and determinants for human behavior. And so what I'm theorizing and what I'm putting forth is the understanding that this is actually being shown to be true. We are historically at a place with science that we can actually now measure and identify a lot of what was theoretical up until quite recently. So we know that at the time of conception that we inherit all of the memory from our respective DNA lineages, including trauma, so all of it. And that's what helps us identify intergenerational patterns, with which I started to notice in my private practice in the work that I did. And so then we have the understanding that that as the fetus is developing, and the limbic brain being the first part of the brain that develops, is taking in sensations in the environment within the womb. So depending on one's stress levels. So we're in epigenetics right now, because now we've identified that the environment is influencing how the brain develops, and that at a very deep cellular level, the fetus is taking in whether or not it's safe to be in their environment. And that's before you're even born. And then you're born, and then you have, depending on your environment, how safe and nurturing and secure it is, you're going to start to begin to have imprinting around all of that. And plus, relationship is being modeled for you in the family system, and then expectations are being projected onto you. So depending on your individual situation, you're already, before you even get into school, deeply imprinted around distorted beliefs about who you are. And then what happens is then that's how we learn to defend ourselves, because the only way that we can feel safe is to defend against whatever's outside of us that's compromising our sense of safety. And that's where we start to begin this cycle in which we keep recreating these dysfunctional experiences through relationship well into adulthood. So what I've identified is that we are genetically predisposed to manifest anything, physical, emotional, and mental, when we have been stressed chronically over a long period of time. And so I believe that all mental illnesses have the antecedent of trauma, and that depending on what your genetic vulnerability and predisposition is going to determine what you actually manifest. So that takes the sort of complexity out of understanding what is happening to people as a result of being out of balance with themselves. And then we bring to it a whole other level of understanding that as they attempt as adults to get their needs met, they continue to cycle through the same patterns and dynamics that they were imprinted with.
So talk to me for just a minute about what are some of the causes of stress? Because I think when we talk about stress, sometimes we think, oh, I'm overworking, or I don't have enough money. You know, we have very sort of mundane definitions of stress. But what I think I'm hearing you say is that stress can actually come from inside of yourself when you're not really tapping into your true self.
Sure. So that would be one definition of it. So that would be one that would be appropriate to talk about from early childhood through adolescence, when you have very little autonomy because you're being, for the most part, controlled by individuals in your environment, and which it's being determined what is in your best interest. And so at a very young age, we learn how to respond to negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement in determining how we're supposed to show up in order to get our needs met. So on how dysfunctional your childhood environment is, that could be extremely stressful, because who you are, who you came in as, is going to be negated in those kinds of interactions, because you're at the effect of the conditioning of the dualistic paradigm in which controls are being put in place to ensure that we all survive the experience of being physical. And so that is one source of stress, but anything can stress us. So anything that you've experienced while you were growing up, and then it would be replicated in your adult relationships and experiences, will always come down to loss. It will always come down to the awareness that something has occurred within the system that has created a significant amount of stress. So poverty, not knowing where your next meal is coming from, not knowing if you're going to be able to pay the rent, is a huge source of stress that will always touch in on imprinting around survival. And so when I work with people, regardless of what their issues are that they've identified, we don't start talking a whole lot about the mental, emotional, spiritual aspects of the self until we're very clear that the physical is being supported. Because Maslow's hierarchy of needs established that if you're working with populations who are in chronic survival mode, it's going to be very, very difficult for them to even think about self-actualization. They're just trying to figure out how they're going to put another meal on the table. So there's varying degrees of stress. It covers a whole spectrum of things, from something as, not being able to pay the bills and keep the lights on, to actually having been raised in a very chaotic, abusive environment. And when you've been imprinted like that, what ends up happening is you end up replicating those dynamics in your adult relationships, not just personally, but also professionally, where you will continue to have experiences in which you believe that you have fundamentally no control over determining your experience.
Wow. So this always feeds into conversations I have with my husband, who is very deterministic in his perspective. And so
and that's why you're together, because you complement each other.
Well, there's definitely some dualism happening there. We talk a lot about what drives somebody in making their choices. And what I really hear you saying is that you do have the freedom to choose differently, but that certain basic needs need to be met first, though, before you can even understand or realize your capacity to choose differently. It's hard to choose differently when you're not well fed, or you're not safe, or you don't have a place to call home or security in that respect.
Right. And you can still start to introduce the understanding that even with individuals who have come through long lineages of, poverty and food insecurity, that they can start to think about the fact that they do have the capacity to change their experience. Because what's happening is, at a very deep unconscious level, is there's a perception that they don't, regardless of what it is, whether we're talking about somebody who is on food stamps and has, fifth generation of food stamps, or whether we're talking about women who are in abusive relationships, is in order to continue to cycle through these experiences, there is the perception that they don't have the capacity to actually have a different experience. And so you can still introduce the concept that can happen.
So you talk about dissolving imprinting at the cellular level. How do you do that?
Yeah. So we start with understanding that imprint is memory. And if you are carrying around memory that has to do with trauma, which we all are, and it doesn't have to meet the level of catastrophic, because depending on how old you were, being negated in your environment by an adult or an older sibling or a teacher is very traumatic. And to an observer, an adult observer in the room, it wouldn't necessarily meet the criteria of a traumatic event that was just experienced. But anytime a child is negated, it is traumatic. And so that is memory that's being held in the 50 trillion cells of our bodies, along with anything else that we've ever experienced. And it's what we defend against when a stimulus in the environment shows up that is in resonance with the imprinting. And so we become activated in response to it. And how we know that is twofold. One is our adrenals become activated, and then with the whole HPA axis cascade starts to happen, where chemicals and hormones are released. And so when you start to train, I train people to notice when their adrenals become activated, because now they're in fight or flight mode. And then if you don't notice that, the next thing you want to notice is that you've started to defend yourself. And that is an indication that memory has been touched in on. And then we identify in that moment that what the reactivity that you bring to the experience has nothing to do with the experience in the moment, but it has to do with what was going on at a much younger age when you weren't really able to defend yourself. And so once we have an intellectual understanding of what's playing out, then I teach people how not to reinforce the imprint by noticing at the moment they start to defend themselves and hit the pause button. And don't defend yourself, and because every time you defend yourself, you reinforce the imprint. So that's the first stage of dissolving the imprint, is learning how not to reinforce it. And so then what happens is then we start to access modalities in the field of energy medicine that will actually dissolve the imprint. So I do energy work. I've been trained in Reiki and craniosacral therapy. So when my clients come to see me, half of the session is just catching up and talking about what they're noticing in their healing process within the framework of the modality, and the other half is spent where they're getting energy work, which helps dissolve the imprinting. And I also work with desert flower essences that have proven to be profoundly effective at dissolving at the cellular level. And I work with children, adolescents, adults, and equally profound experiences. And so the more I explored this, the more I started to understand that with no exception, when you're working with energy, you can actually dissolve these imprints. And that's the big part of the nonprofit that I've created, because now we're going to be working with large groups of people. We can accommodate way more people than what I've been able to do in my private practice. And we can refer them out to different practitioners in the community where they can access all different incredible modalities in order to dissolve the memory of the trauma that they've been carrying around, not just for generational lineage, but if you want to go wider, they brought this memory in from other lifetimes, and it's really what is referred to when people use the term karma. That's all karma is memory. It's totally neutral. So what's happening where we are right now in history, just the fact that you and I are having this conversation on the radio, is because we've reached a point where the mass is starting to recognize that what we're talking about is real and true, and that profound changes can be made towards the healing into self-actualization, and that you can actually release memory going back to the beginning of incarnations.
Wow. So I'd like to know a little bit more, because you kind of dropped this nonprofit thing in, and I want to hear a little bit more about the Healing Alliance of Central Virginia. Tell me about your nonprofit and how people can tap into that, and your intention and your vision for this agency.
Yes, and it's a great introduction, because what I'm realizing is this has been a dawning awareness on my part as the modality came through and as the book got written, and then sort of taking a moment to acknowledge that I actually did create a new modality in the field of mental health counseling, which is a little overwhelming given my imprinting, to say the least. And then to recognize that in order for this to have the fullest expression of what its capacity can be, there needs to be something. It's larger than me. It's bigger than me. So I created the nonprofit, the Healing Alliance of Central Virginia, as a platform, educational and health platform, to allow individuals to access all of the modalities that we're going to be offering within the framework of energy medicine to dissolve these imprints. Now, there's another piece to this that has just come through, because like everything, we are all constantly evolving. To the extent that I can get out of the way is to the extent that I'm able to continue to see how much more this can become. And so in all the work that I've done over the last 12 years, what I've come to understand is that the least served developmental stage within the field of mental health counseling is adolescence. It is my understanding that 90% of therapists refuse to work with adolescents. And I talk about that because it really does reinforce the understanding that their unresolved imprinting is always in the room, and adolescence is the most difficult stage of development. It has the greatest charge to it. It has the biggest response from the collective in being in opposition to what adolescents are attempting to do in their differentiation and developing self-identity. And it's where we lose a lot of people, because a lot of stuff happens in adolescence that determines the future, if they stay around long enough, in terms of what, where they end up in adulthood. And so what I've come to understand is it's my favorite demographic to work with. And I recognize that this particular modality can now be advertised as an intervention at the age of 12, pre-adolescence, metacognition kicking in, that will change people's lives. What happens when I sit with adolescents and young adults is within 8 sessions, I have a different kid in front of me. That's how fast the shift can be when you're working with kids this age. And it is the difference between whether I could be sitting with a 40-year-old who's got way more practice in defending their position and therefore a lot more resistance that they're bringing into the process, and a lot more invested, because if somebody's married and they have 5 children, and that's all based on this unconscious imprinting and dysfunctional patterns, there's going to be a lot more anxiety about changing their approach, their perceptions, and how they do relationship. But when you get these kids in, these adolescents and these young adults, they are hungry and ripe for this information. And you just have to give them a little bit and everything changes. So the more I see this happening, the more I realize that I really want to start advertising this as the missing piece, because there's a lot going on in the field of mental health counseling right now where the general consensus is we don't have anything that we can offer these kids to make a difference other than what the traditional methods have been, which is to medicate them, which I'm strongly opposed to.
I think that's a very profound and I think certainly a vital piece of place where I think there's a lot of service that needs to be delivered. So thank you for doing that.
Yes.
So one of the things I always ask my guests is, especially for someone like you who I think is spanning and sort of bridging between 2 different paradigms, or an emerging paradigm from an old paradigm, around how to create wholeness and wellness and alignment with our true selves. Talk to me a little bit about what you see and what you think is actually happening on the planet right now. You've sort of intimated that things are kind of coming apart for a reason. And talk to me a little bit about, what do people who are aware and awake and maybe sensitive to the stressors of shifting energies happening on the planet, what can they do to stabilize themselves while we go through this kind of shift that we're going through?
Great. Yes. So, the first thing that I would want to just identify is that what is going on is evidence of the fact that the systems that are in place are not working, haven't worked for a long time, because they're meeting the needs of a few people. And one of the things that I write about in the book is, when you look at the statistics of how many people are living in poverty in this country, that in itself is evidence of the fact that this is not a true democracy. And so the political systems that are in place that continue to reinforce the statistics that indicate that, in a country such as this, people should not be wondering where their next meal comes from. The destabilization that we're seeing, the catalytic forces that are in place right now that are destabilizing our government, are a part of the shift that's occurring, so we can actually get to a place where people are feeling safer and more secure about their future, where there's an equal or more equal distribution of wealth in this country. So, that's one way to talk about this shift in an obvious way from my perspective. And that what I'm also noticing as this shift occurs, mostly with people who consider themselves to be aware and who have studied spiritual, esoteric teachings for a long time, is I can't help notice how reactive a lot of these folks are becoming and how divisive and how dualistic they're becoming in response to what's playing out, which is just a reminder of the fact that no matter how aware we think we are, we're still going to be coming from our unconscious imprinting on the subject of times in which we did not feel safe. So the destabilization of what's occurring outside of us is going to trigger all of our imprinting around not feeling safe. And so this is just an opportunity for us to notice that this is happening without judging it. And what you want to do is do your best not to take sides. Charlottesville, which is where I live, is becoming known on a national scale because it's becoming a huge hotspot for the movement to remove the Confederate statues, and it's as a result, it's bringing extreme alt-right individuals and their platforms to the community. And then I'm noticing the people who are responding to that. And so what I'm recognizing is there's a lot of unconsciousness that's playing out in their response because it's coming from the dualistic paradigm in which they're in opposition to what's showing up. And by being in opposition to what's showing up, they're actually energizing it. One of my first spiritual teachers taught us that war activism is the same energy, the same frequency as war. So when you demonstrate for peace, the act of demonstrating is the same energy as war because you're in opposition to something that's outside of you. So it's an opportunity for people to really understand that they have way more influence by just choosing to focus on themselves and recognize the aspects of themselves that they're in opposition to and heal that. And in doing so, everything outside of you changes. But when you show up with a sign on the downtown mall because you believe that you need to be as oppositional to what it is you've judged outside of yourself is not correct, you're actually reinforcing the very thing that you've identified you don't want to experience.
Well said. And I think an important and enlightening perspective for all of us to pay attention to. I just spent the week with all of my adult children who are what I call radical vegans. They're not regular vegans. They're very radicalized. And my husband made the mistake of taking my 8-year-old fishing while they were here. And it was a very polarized experience.
Well, it's always awesome because the material is you get to just notice.
Mm-hmm.
It's just about noticing, being the observer in your experience. And you can actually, one of my greatest teachers just keeps reminding us, look, you're either here for your enlightenment or so if whatever's going on isn't helping you become enlightened, then at least enjoy the show.
It was a great show, let me assure you.
Yes, I bet it was.
We had some long conversations. Go ahead.
You're starting to notice what extreme looks like. So, it's being an extreme vegan, you bring a charge and an intolerance to anything that doesn't fit within that paradigm.
Yes, that's putting it loosely. So I want to make sure everybody has a way of connecting with you. So Kate, your website is www.o'connellkate.com, and that's OCONNELLKATE.com to connect with your work personally. And your nonprofit Healing Alliance of Central Virginia is HACVA.org. I'm wondering if you have any last closing comments that you'd like to make. And in particular, I'd like to hear, what is your vision as someone who I think is doing really important work, ushering in this new quantum era? What is your vision for what the world is going to look like as we move more deeply into this paradigm shift?
What I believe the world is going to look like down the road, and depending on who I talk to in terms of high frequency spiritual teachers, there's the idea that my son's children will start to experience the benefits of this paradigm shift. So things will start to even out a little bit, and that there will be a wider, less divisive, beyond the duality of what we have been imprinted with, in which there's more inclusivity, there's less competitiveness, there's greater cooperation, and the children that are coming into this world have this innate understanding that we don't need to be perpetrating violence on each other in order to get our needs met.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I love that. So thank you so much, Kate, for the work that you're doing and for making it accessible to everyone. And thank you for joining us. Your book is called Beyond the Imprint, and you can grab it on Amazon and go get it, especially not only if you are a healing practitioner yourself, but also go read this book so you can look at your own inner dynamics and what you can do to move beyond your imprint. So thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
Stress, trauma, even reading the news can cause us to reinforce the imprint of trauma on our bodies. When you realize that you may be carrying trauma on a cellular level that didn't even happen to you in this lifetime, it's overwhelming to think about what all of us must be holding in our bodies and in our imprints. Traumatic imprints take us away from our ability to be fundamentally creative. Instead of finding solutions that generate abundance, joy, healing, harmony, and peace, we react in defense of hidden traumas in ourselves, and we drop into a way of creating, a way of being, that forces us to only be able to create from a tiny set of choices determined by our imprint. The world is demanding of us that we find solutions to challenges that humanity has never faced before. If we are to find elegant solutions to war, hunger, or global warming, we have to be fundamentally creative, not reactive. And to be fundamentally creative, we have to clear the imprint of what has come before on the planet. We have to heal on a cellular level so that we can be who we came here to be and do what we came here to do. I believe that each and every one of us has incarnated on the planet right now to clear the imprint of trauma in the cells of humanity, and that this level of healing is now the most vital thing we have to do to unlock our true powerful creative capacity, so we can evolve a world of sustainable peace and resources. If you'd like to learn more about who you truly are and what might be keeping you from fully expressing the magnificence of your being, please visit our Quantum Conversations Facebook page where you can get a blueprint of your life and soul purpose, your human design. I'll even send you a free report to help you figure out what you're here to do and how you can start living in alignment with who you truly are. Thank you for joining me for Quantum Conversations. I'm Karen Curry Parker. Here's to you clearing your imprint and releasing anything that's holding you back from being the full expression of who you truly are.
Thanks for listening to Quantum Conversations with Karen Curry Parker. For more information, visit joyfulmission.com.